seeing it maybe like Japanese festival with the yukata. And this was the Keicho period. This was 1596 to 1615. And this was the early Edo era. And the Edo era was when the shogun or supreme military dictator started ruling the country and the emperor became the figurehead. And the Edo era is when they started having sumptuary laws about what a samurai or a peasant could wear. Even though you still saw a lot of 11th century style patterns on the kimono, you started seeing the kimonos were shorter. You didn't see as much of the trailing outer robes. This is actually a high-ranking courtesan in the very popular style of kisode. And if you look, this is also the point in time where tabi, or the little toe socks, became popular. Because when the pants got shorter, your feet weren't covered, your feet got cold. So you started wearing the tabi, and if you actually look at the picture, you can see one little purple-clad foot peeking out from underneath there. And this is actually made popular by the courtesans of that time period. So then the other women started wearing it. And then if you look at this other picture, you'll see her obi is made out of plain cord. And the reason they didn't have the wide obis that you might see on something like, I guess, Botan from Yu Yu Hakusho. This is where you'd see the large obis with the long flowing sleeves. You don't get to that point yet because everybody's focusing on the kimono at this period. Because you'll see the checkers and the embroidery. And this is when and I'm going to scoot to the next picture to give you a better idea of the textiles that were becoming very popular. These were where the Japanese craftsmen were really coming into their own. You saw the gold leaf on the silk. You saw the embroidery. You saw very specifically Japanese patterns. You weren't seeing the Chinese anymore because Japan was starting to close itself off from Western influences or just outside influences in general, including the Chinese. And so the kimonos were getting very elaborate. And you can see how it fills up the entire garment with pattern. So they were wearing the thinner obis. They could have been a cord or just a thin sash, like you see the samurai woman wearing. And this is because they didn't want to cover up the pattern. So they'd wear okay, I'm going to switch microphones here. Okay, can you hear me now? Okay, good. Sorry about that. We've had a little bit of difficulties with the mics this weekend. You'd start to see the obis getting bigger as you go through time. So we're going to go into the Genroku period. And this was 1688 to 1704. And this is the middle of the Edo period. This is when you start to see the longer sleeves, the wider obis, the more subdued patterns, and the updos, the geisha hairdos. This is when you see the samurai in the hakama with just a regular kimono tucked in. And here we have a commoner in the kusode, and this is when the sleeves started getting longer. And one of the reasons the sleeves started getting longer is because they thought it was very elegant. The kabuki actors actually started doing this because they wanted to look more flamboyant on stage. And because they didn't have pop stars in the Edo era, everybody went to kabuki. So it was the kabuki actors and also the geisha who were leaders of fashion. So when they wore their sleeves just a little bit longer, everybody wanted to wear their sleeves just a little bit longer. And then you also start seeing the kimono is simplified when it comes to pattern on the garment. You start seeing it as a means to, you start focusing on smaller portions. Quality of the work really starts to improve here. It becomes more subtle. And then the obis also start to get wider because they realize the wider your obi is, the more back support you have. And let's face it, when you're on the tatami mat kneeling all day, you have to have some form of back support because they didn't have chairs. So this is why the obis started getting wider. And even though you can see that this obi really is just dangling at this point, the obis can get really fancy. There's bows and all. I've actually seen obi knots tied into origami cranes. Wow. And I once saw, and I cannot do this one, I once saw an obi knot tied into the shape of Hello Kitty's head.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I know. You know, you can find Hello Kitty on everything in Japan. Why wouldn't you find it on a kimono? So the sleeves start getting longer, the obis start getting wider, and then you really start getting, I mean, you still have a fairly bright, cheerful kimono here. The pattern's still fairly large. And then you get into the late Edo era. And because